My friend, pregnant with her first child, sent me this screenshot. It was a list of genetic tests for her unborn baby, including some newer genetic ones not available in the past. Her text simply read, "Which one should I take?" And it hit me. She wasn't just asking about her baby's health. She was asking a question we'll all be facing soon, even if we don't have kids. Science and technology are giving us unprecedented access to our own biological blueprints. We're talking about a future where you can know more about your body, your health risks, your potential, more than ever before. And you can know it earlier than ever before too. This isn't just about satisfying curiosity. It's about potentially making choices that could change the course of our lives. For example, the NHS just announced a new AI test that can predict your risk of type 2 diabetes with at least 70% accuracy by spotting hidden patterns in your ECG heart signals, patterns that are invisible to the human eye. This is just one example, but it shows how quickly this field is moving. And this is just the beginning. Imagine a future where every newborn gets their entire genome sequenced, a complete map of their genetic predispositions. The implications of this are enormous, raising ethical, social, and philosophical questions we're only beginning to grapple with. In that future, with all of the world's information at your fingertips, what would you want to know about yourself? And perhaps more importantly, what would you not want to know? Is all knowledge empowering, or can it be a burden? When is ignorance truly bliss? These are the questions that kept me up that night and led me to make this video. I'm no doctor, and this isn't medical advice, but I am fascinated by this question. So I dove in, exploring perspectives from medicine, philosophy, economics, and psychology to try and figure out how I'd approach those choices and maybe help you navigate them too. By the end of this video, you'll have a framework for making these decisions, a framework grounded in your own values. Let's start with the medical perspective. If you walked into a doctor's office today wrestling with this decision, what criteria might they use to guide you? Well, they'll likely call on three big criteria: actionability, severity/probability, and the value of early detection. These are effectively the pillars that underpin medical decision-making when it comes to these kind of tests. So let's look at each in turn. First, actionability. That's a fancy word for a simple question. It's basically saying, can you actually do anything with this information? If a test says you're at risk for high cholesterol, great. You can trade in those Lindt chocolate bars for kale, joy. But what if it's a rare, untreatable neurological disease that shows up later in life? The actionability there is low, or at least very different. What would you do? This is where it starts to get really personal. Different people have different thresholds for what they consider a big deal. So that's actionability. Next, severity/probability. So it's a balancing act. How serious is the condition versus how likely are you to actually get it? A slightly increased risk of a mild skin rash? Probably not a big deal. But even a small chance of a life-threatening illness? That might grab your attention, regardless of probability. Finally, early detection. Does finding out early actually make a difference? For some cancers, catching it early can be the difference between life and death. But for other conditions, there might be no effective treatment, period. Or treatment might be just as effective later on if symptoms develop. Early detection can even lead to overdiagnosis, finding something that would never have caused a problem, and overtreatment, which carries its own risk. So it's not always a clear-cut equation. So that's the medical perspective. But what if, say, we could travel back in time and grab a glass of ancient wine with some of history's greatest thinkers and ask them about this whole to know or not to know dilemma? What might they say? Well, let's try and tap into some of that philosophical wisdom. First up, Socrates, who believed the unexamined life is not worth living. So for him, genetic testing might be another tool for self-knowledge. Not to find answers, but to probe deeper questions. Questions such as, what matters to me? How should I live? What legacy do I want to leave? But what if knowing ourselves means uncovering things that are frankly a bit scary? Well, that's where the Stoics might offer some guidance. A Stoic wouldn't see knowledge of a potential health issue as a reason to panic. They'd see it as an opportunity for mental preparation. Okay, this might happen. How can I be my best, most courageous self, even if it does? It's about focusing on what you can control, your response. So if you lean towards the Stoics, you might see value in knowing even the bad news, because it lets you practice resilience. The Stoics could help us prepare mentally, but what about the sheer weight of responsibility that comes with this kind of knowledge? Well, that's where the existentialists could offer up some answers. Jean-Paul Sartre, for example, famously said, "We're condemned to be free." And with that freedom comes a huge responsibility for our choices. More knowledge can feel like more pressure to make the right choices. An existentialist might ask, does this knowledge help me live a more authentic or more meaningful life? Or does it just fuel anxiety? And say it does fuel anxiety. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Perhaps a certain level of anxiety is part of being human and should be experienced. And it's not just about us as individuals. Think about Confucianism, with its emphasis on family and social harmony. If you learn something about your health that could impact your family, would you have a duty to tell them? Confucianism suggests our choices ripple outwards, infecting those around us. This is where some Eastern philosophies might also offer a different take. Take the Buddhist ritual of creating intricate sand mandalas, only to destroy them shortly afterwards. It's a powerful symbol of impermanence, of accepting change. Perhaps it's a reminder that our bodies are also impermanent, that change, even decline, is inevitable. And maybe that accepting what we cannot change is just as important as knowing what we can. So, as you can see, different philosophies offer vastly different lenses through which to view this dilemma. There's no single right answer. It's about figuring out what resonates with you, what aligns with your values. Okay, now let's put on an economist's hat. How might they frame this decision? Probably as an investment, potential payoff, potential costs, and a whole lot of uncertainty. First, the information itself is an investment. You pay a price, money, time, emotional energy, hoping for a valuable return. And that return, it might be in the form of early detection, a chance to intervene, maybe even a longer, healthier life. That's a huge potential payoff. Although, as we discussed, it may also be less tangible things, such as peace of mind from knowing where you stand. Now, economists, they love their ROI, return on investment. They'd meticulously weigh up these potential benefits, say a longer life, lower healthcare costs down the line, against the costs. Everything from the price of the tests and the follow-up treatments, and yes, even the emotional toll of worrying. Although, good luck putting a dollar value on existential dread. And of course, the future is uncertain. A test might flag a risk for a disease you'll never actually develop. That's a risk they would factor in using their probabilities and statistical models. And let's not forget opportunity cost. That's the economist's idea that every choice means foregoing something else. The money or time you sink into testing, that's money or time not spent on a much needed vacation, your child's education, or simply relaxing and enjoying life. This is also where it gets into much more murky territory. Could this genetic information be used against you? Could an insurance company or a potential employer use it to make decisions? That's a legitimate concern and one that we'll need to address as a society. On the flip side, some might argue that knowing about predisposition to a costly health condition could actually be helpful for long-term financial planning. Would you need to ramp up your savings, adjust your retirement plans? Finally, there's behavioral economics. This field dives into the messy reality of how people actually make decisions, not just how they should in a perfectly rational world. We're not robots. A savvy economist would try and factor in these very human biases. And that's a perfect segue for us to consider what the psychologists might say about this problem. So how do our own minds factor into this complex decision? This is where psychology and behavioral science might come in. That field offers crucial insights, reminding us we're not always rational, especially when it comes to our health. The unknown, let's face it, can be terrifying. Just the thought of genetic testing can unleash a torrent of uncertainty. We might find ourselves worrying about what we'll discover, how it might change our lives, and perhaps most importantly, how we'll cope. Suddenly, emotions are in the driver's seat. And let's be honest, our perception of risk isn't always accurate. Behavioral scientists call this risk perception, and it's shaped by a whole host of factors: our personalities, our past experiences, and even how the information is presented to us. For example, are you more swayed by cold hard statistics or by a compelling story about one person's experience? And then there are cognitive biases, those mental shortcuts that can sometimes lead us astray. There's lots more potential biases not listed here. Optimism bias, it might convince us we're less at risk than we actually are, while the availability bias might make us fixate on risks that are constantly in the news, regardless of their actual probability. Sometimes our minds use a powerful defense mechanism: denial. We might downplay a health risk, telling ourselves, it won't happen to me. That's a natural human response, but it can also prevent us from taking proactive steps. Plus, it won't happen to me. That makes for terrible last words, statistically speaking. And to top it all off, those are often high-stakes decisions, and we're often making them under considerable stress. When we're stressed, our decision-making can become impulsive, or we might find ourselves paralyzed by indecision. By the way, this is where genetic counseling can be an absolute game changer. Genetic counselors don't just explain the science. They're trained to help us navigate this complex emotional landscape of testing. But perhaps the most comforting thing I learned from exploring the psychological perspective is that it's okay to feel conflicted. It's okay to be anxious, uncertain, or even to decide that for now, you'd rather not know. So how can we tell if this is all moving from a theoretical what if to a concrete reality? Well, here are some key signals to watch out for in the coming years. Firstly, does genetic testing go mainstream? So watch out for more genetic tests being advertised directly to consumers or offered by your doctor, or maybe even included in your employee wellness program. This signals wider acceptance. If you start seeing these tests everywhere, that's a clear signal. Next, the rise of personalized wellness. Do you notice a surge in products and services tailored to your unique genetic makeup? Maybe personalized diets or custom fitness plans or targeted supplements. This is where you'll see the marketing shift from general health advice to what's right for your genes. Next, the insurance and employment question. Watch the news for any stories about insurance companies and employers who might be seeking access to genetic data. These battles over genetic privacy could signal a shift about where your genes impact your opportunities, for better or for worse. Next up, look at the data privacy debate and see if it intensifies. Expect to see more heated discussions about health data privacy, particularly concerning genetic information. Are new laws being proposed? Are there high-profile data breaches involving genetic data? This is where you'll want to pay very close attention to the fine print and demand clear answers about how your data will be used. Also, a growing focus on genetic literacy. Are you seeing more of a push for public education around genetics? Are people starting to talk about it more in their everyday lives? This signals a positive move towards a more informed public, ready to make empowered choices. And this is where you can take the initiative. Start learning about this sort of stuff now so that you're prepared for the future. So, before we wrap up, let's go back to that central question. Is it sometimes better not to know? As always in FutureFlect, I'm going to encourage you to come to your own point of view. This is a deeply personal decision, and the right answer will depend on your individual values, your personality, and the specific context of the test. I'll share my personal take for what it's worth. From a well-being perspective, I think I would want to know most things. But I also acknowledge that sometimes ignorance might indeed be bliss, particularly if we're talking about something that wouldn't affect me for decades and where there's little I could do about it now. You may be the same, or you may be different, but I am genuinely excited about the possibilities. We've talked about serious diseases, but there's a whole spectrum here. Imagine fine-tuning your lifestyle based on unique genetic makeup. For me, sleep has always been a challenge. What if a test could pinpoint the optimal time for me to go to bed based on my genes? So I no longer get that ad on TikTok at 3 a.m. telling me to go to bed. That's a real badge of shame, by the way, if you've got one of those. They're only shown to folks who are completely incorrigible. Or what if I could reveal the type of exercise that's most beneficial for my specific predisposition? Or if I took that AI test mentioned earlier and modified my diet accordingly? We're not just talking about living longer. We're talking about living better, maximizing our health span, as the experts call it. That's a future I'm eager to explore. But, and this is a big but, we need to be more cautious. We are more than just the sum of our genes. I came across this quote that really resonated with me. Life's a canvas, not a blueprint. Our choices, our experiences, the people we love, they all shape us in profound ways. We can't fall into this trap of genetic essentialism, of thinking that our DNA determines our entire destiny. We'll need to ensure we don't let this knowledge limit our potential, or even worse, create new forms of discrimination. And then there's the whole access issue. Right now, some of these tests are expensive. And while costs will likely come down over time, we need to be mindful of the potential for a two-tiered system where access to this life-changing information is determined by your insurance coverage or your ability to pay. And it would be naive to ignore the privacy concerns. Our genetic data is arguably the most intimate, the most personal data there is, and we'll need robust safeguards to protect it. And finally, on that note, to truly prepare ourselves for this future, we need to boost our connective genetic literacy. We need to understand the basics of genetics, the potential and the limitations of these technologies, so that we can participate in those discussions with our doctors, our families, our lawmakers, in a thoughtful, informed, and confident way. So what are your thoughts? I'd love to hear your perspective on all of this. Would you want to know everything your genes reveal? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay curious to stay ahead.